Aaron Bielner, and Eric B. And you're listening to the Diary of a Little Man's Podcast. All right, another episode of the Diary of the Little Man's Podcast. We're going back to what we were talking about a couple weeks ago, and we were going to go ahead and get this moving right now. I am Eric B.
I'm Aaron Bielner.
And this is the Diary of the Little Man's Podcast. Aaron, how's it going?
It's great. How are you?
It's going well. We're expecting to have some kind of wet weather here in San Francisco, so we're going to be hunkering down for the next couple of days.
Like really severe wet weather?
Well, you know, any little rain in San Francisco is severe. So
Yeah. You know, and I'm going to butcher this, and I don't mean to. Wasn't it? Mark Twain said, you know, because San Francisco weather is up and down and so wild at times that he said the coldest winter I ever spent, I spent in San Francisco.
It was the coldest winter I ever spent was a summer in San Francisco.
A summer in San Francisco. Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God. Yeah. But I get it.
Yeah.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
And, you know, being off the bay, you know, I have been to San Francisco a bunch and not as much as you living there, obviously. And I love this city. I love the feel of it. I love the atmosphere. I love the people. The hills are amazing. Yes. You know, it's like one street goes that way, one street goes that way. And yet I love that breeze, you know, that air that comes off the bay. And sometimes I'm sure people go, oh God, I wish it would just ease off and settle for a little bit. But when you're not, you know, when you're not there all the time, it's kind of brings life to you. You know, it's intriguing and mysterious, and I love being down there, you know, at night even, and the sense of, you know, that majesty, if you will, and that unknowing of what's beyond the waters. And I've always been a big fan of San Francisco. So you guys are getting wet weather. We're getting, luckily now in Atlanta, we've had plenty of wet weather, but we're getting sunlight, thank God, but we're also getting cold. Like one day it's 70, the next day it's a high of 50. And for us, I mean, people are like, oh, quit complaining. What are you bitching about? 50 degrees. That's chafing in the Midwest. You know, that's sultry in the Midwest. But for us, you know, I'm going to sound like a wuss, Eric. I'm not geared for Midwest winters anymore. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday he lives on the east side of Iowa in Dubuque, and he's like, oh, it's cold here. It's really been cold lately. And I'm like, oh yeah, I don't miss that at all. I'm sorry. That sounds horrible, but I don't. And I don't miss, there's a long running joke, you know, snow in April. You know, you think you're in the spring and you're like, yay. And then all of a sudden 3 or 4 inches of snow, you know, the first week of April. And it's like, oh yeah. Now, the snow is cool for a little bit.
Yeah. But I've never lived in snow weather, so I'm fortunate that I've never lived there, and I hate driving in snow whenever I have to. So San Francisco is good enough for me right now.
Mm-hmm. Does it get, can we breach that briefly? Can we breach that topic really quickly, actually? Does it get, because I've never driven in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. I've never had a car there. I've always traveled and had somebody drive or what have you, visitors. Does it get, like, if it's really raining, do you worry about, like, some of those, and I'm going to sound so aloof and obtuse, so bear with me. I'm not a San Franciscan. Does it get dangerous? You know, some of those hills can be wild. Have you ever had that experience where, for lack of a better word, hydroplaning or anything like that?
So the hydroplane happens on flat surfaces. So like, you know, the street that I live on is pretty much flat. And there's a couple times, I lived here for over 20 years in this area. There's a couple times where if it rains really hard, water does sit and not move. But in the past 10 years, we've had a lot of, you know, I'm going to call them idiot drivers, that's been coming into San Francisco, and they're the ones that causes the accidents and all that stuff during the rain, because they don't know how to slow down. California has a rule. I don't know if Atlanta or Georgia has a rule, but we have a rule where if you're using your windshield wipers, you have to turn on your headlights. And that's just a common.
We do have that.
All right, good.
Yeah, we do have
and then,
that.
But you know, you have those people who don't follow that rule. So it's like I can barely see out my rear view mirror because it's raining. And then next thing you know, there's a car like 2 feet behind me, and I didn't even notice because he didn't have his headlights on. So,
You know what? You've opened a can of worms because I just thought about this, and we're going to apply this to the show if you're cool with it. Being a little person, that's another reason why being in the Midwest and even like in weather where it's raining, what have you. Okay, yeah. Let's go to the rain idea. If you had to wear, and I know this sounds trivial, but it does get annoying at times. If you had to wear boots outside, rubber boots or whatever, that was always unbearable as a little person because you can never find, the boots that fit or whatever, or the boots that look like you weren't like 4 years old. Then if you did find those that, fit, I remember putting my dad's boots on, and my dad's average size, he had like rubber boots that he wore out on the farm and stuff. I remember putting those on once to go do something just really quickly. Yeah. And the tops of the boots were like hitting me in the ass. So like my whole leg was in the boot, and I was kind of doing a Tin Man maneuver where I didn't, I couldn't bend my knees.
Yeah.
So it was like, and so I thought of that the instant you said about the rain, and like hydroplaning and water and dealing with people who don't know how to drive in it. I put the boots on. Just in my mind, I'm sitting there sloshing through that. And then I started thinking about in the Midwest, when there were moments where, it wasn't 2 or 3 inches of snow, it was feet of snow.
Yeah.
And as a little person, and again, not a pity thing, just reality. In fact, when you had to bundle up and get everything ready, and then if you have kids and you have to bundle them up, and then you go out there like these gingerbread Eskimos, where you're trying to maneuver, just physically maneuver without any of the 18 layers on and everything on, let alone have a child or whatever, and then have to shovel something out or snowblow or what. It's such a ridiculous process for the average human being to begin with. Then you've got this little fella out there trying to do it, and it's just like a Marx Brothers routine. And so when you don't have to make that part of your life, to choose that. I get why, and this is real. I mean, this is true. I didn't meet a lot of little people in the Midwest. Now, Chicago, of course, by numbers, you might have more people that live there, Minneapolis, but in the where I was in Northwest Iowa, I didn't meet a lot of little people. And then I met a lot more coming to the Southeast. And twofold, one, they family members were born and raised here, they stay here. What I get that, but also just that whole idea of these circumstances are so much more conducive to a person. I'm not a big fan of ridiculous heat. Yeah. So August here in Atlanta is like, oh God, I can't wait for this to be over. But at least you weren't having to bundle up. And, I think about like, people who live in Alaska or people who live in Northeast or where they do have inclement weather or that kind of weather 5 or 6 months out of the year. And I'm going, oh, that would just be brutal. Yeah. That would be, so that kind of opened a can of worms when you were talking about the wet weather.
It's funny. You mentioned Alaska. I met a little person that I worked with where I'm at right now that lived in Juneau, and
wow.
He's Alaskan. He enjoyed his life in Alaska, but he also talked about the challenges that he had growing up as a little person. His whole family's average size. He's the little person. And the running joke that his family always gave him was, when we went ice fishing, this is what we caught. And, they're pointing at him.
Oh my God, that's the way.
But he's a funny guy. He's one of those guys that he uses his height as for humor, and he goes, right. For the longest time he was like, it is what it is. I got to accept who I am, and if you have to accept me for who I am. But if not, then that's you guys. But right. No, he was really cool. But he did tell me the horror stories about growing up in Juneau. He's like, when we go ice fishing, and it's a thing where all the men has to go ice fishing, and some women had to go also. And he was like, how hard it was where everybody was carrying all this equipment, and I had to carry like the net and the poles, and he could never ride a snowmobile by himself because he couldn't reach he couldn't reach the handlebars. So he was
Okay.
just when you told me about Alaska, and I was like, oh man, that's my friend Adi that was in Alaska for a while. He's now here in Stanford. I think I want to say he's over in Stanford, which is north of
Okay.
south of where we are, and he's in the medical field, so he's doing his good thing as well. So
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm feeding off of this. I was just thinking about that. So, like you in the Midwest, I was, and for due reason, I had limited amounts that I could do on the farm, and just because of physicality, cattle are sizable animals, and they're not light, and so if they were to be unsettled, you hear about
yeah,
stampedes, whatever, I would be screwed. I mean, I would be
yeah.
the spot on the bottom of their hooves. And so I didn't do a lot with cattle with my dad. I did some with hogs. I did a lot more like we used to do, which I mean was kind of before it was all pretty much ended. We used to bean ride, what was called bean riding. And
Huh.
what that is you're sitting on a seat on this bar of 4 seats. It's this long metal bar with 4 seats on it, strapped to the front of the tractor, spraying,
Oh,
literally spraying. Now we're talking Monsanto here and
yeah.
Roundup and all that, spraying the weeds in the bean fields. Because if there were weeds or any type of involuntary plant in the beans, that can lower yields. That can also cause it. It costs the farmers money when it comes time to harvesting, as far as any type of uh, what am I trying to say? Any type of material that's in the beans that you don't want, then they get deducted for that when they sell those.
Yes.
So you're getting rid of the weeds. You're getting rid of what's called involuntary corn.
Yeah.
And I know this is a lesson in farming, which everybody's going, "Oh my God, I didn't know we were going to go down that hole."
No, we like it. I like it.
Farming these fields are usually every other year planted a different thing. So if you plant corn in one year on that field, you're going to plant soybeans the next year in that same field. You're going to crop rotation.
Oh wow.
And the
Okay.
reason being is because corn takes nitrogen out of the ground, and soybeans put nitrogen into the ground. So you get better yields if you rotate your crops
Wow.
every year. So long story short, that I say all that to say we would ride for the beans, and I did a bunch of that. And so you'd sit there, you'd get up in the morning, you'd be on a machine probably by 8 a.m., sitting in your little chair with your little spray gun that was connected to this big tank of Roundup, and which everybody frowns on now, and spray hundreds and hundreds of acres of beans
Wow.
to get rid of all the weeds. Yeah. And it was like in all fairness, it was like a 2 week deal, just shy of a 2 week deal, where you'd get up and be done. We'd be done, get up and be on that machine by 8 a.m. and probably be done by 6 that night. That was how many hours? You'd about a 10-hour day easily, and then do it again and again and again until all those acres were done. And that whole process, I could do that. I as a little person, just strapped into a seat on the front of a machine spraying weeds, that I could handle. You talk about your friend from Juneau and like the ice fishing thing. And I mentioned all that to say, in the winter months, or just in the regular, like to go out in a field, and we're, after it had been harvested, there were rows of the stalks that were left from either the corn plants or the bean plants. And for me to cross over those, it was almost like high hurdles, for the average person, it'd be like, oh, this is nothing. But just to physically get through that area, if it was planted, you hear the horror stories of like kids being in a cornfield and they can't find their way out.
Yeah.
But to follow the rows, because the rows will eventually get you to the end of that. And then you could either see the road or you could see the next, section. So you could tell where you were if you got to the end of the row. But when it was all harvested and you were like crossing over those mounds, I remember as a kid, it was like sitting there and, just literally tried to get up over, as a little person, and being at that time, I'm 4'3", when I was a kid, I don't know, 3 feet tall, what have you.
Yeah.
And so, Yeah, just that idea that you never take into consideration, or the average individual doesn't take into consideration that you're having to climb over things. So, and I say that just to share that, it teaches you appreciation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It teaches you there are people that have a lot more physical challenges than I will ever fathom.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have such great respect and appreciation and empathy for those individuals who have even greater challenges. When you think about what it takes for you, Eric Balanik, to leave your house in the morning, and then what it takes myself or other people, where it's like there's a lot more planning involved just to do everyday things.
Yeah.
And we talked about last time, this opening this show for like day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
There are definitely days where none of that comes into play. It doesn't really affect you. You're thinking, about your day. You don't think about that stuff. And then there are days where it seems like it's that Herculean weight on your shoulders, and you're just, and again, I'm not trying to sound like woe is me. It's just, they're like, oh, I got to do this, and I've got to do this. And knowing that it's that kind of physical, challenge or obstacle, I got to make sure I give enough time for this, and, make sure, it's crazy. It definitely gives you a unique perspective on what we call human life.
Yeah. So. No, I mean, I totally understand. I mean, it's, going back to my friend Adi, he told me this story. He's like, when I was like 12 and 13, while everyone was fishing, my dad used to take a rope and tie it around my waist, and he used to anchor me on one of the snowmobiles. And at that age, I never realized why he was doing that. I was like, why are you tethering? He thought himself of, he's a dog and they don't want him running away. But as he got older, he realized my dad only tethered me to that because in case I did catch a fish, he didn't want me falling in that hole.
Yeah.
And he was like, he didn't realize that as a child, but as an adult, he was like, I thank my dad for that. It's like, there's many times that I seen regular guys who with their strength couldn't even try to get that fish in. And he goes, and there's, I caught a couple of fish. He's like, hey, he caught a couple of fishes, but with that tether, it helped him not falling in. I was like, wow.
Yeah. And think about how, oh God, if he did fall in.
Yeah.
I mean, that very well could be the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, of course, hindsight is 20/20, but just thinking about that, if that were to happen, the chances of something way wrong going, literally to the point of death, it kind of makes you shake.
Yeah.
When you're younger, you're fearless.
Yeah.
And I think that for the most part, and I think the fearless comes from the fact of not knowing. And when you get older, you experience things and realize things. And then we worry as parents. We're parents. Oh, yeah. You're a father. I'm a father. And you're like, oh, God, if they only knew. And they won't know until they experience it.
Yeah.
And, it keeps you up at night sometimes thinking about what your kids could experience and what they could face. And it's the burden of parenting that we all take on when we think that's, where we're going to, start having children. And also I was, when you were talking about the tethering thing, I just talked to this guy yesterday, a good friend of mine from college, and he's a high school teacher, and then he's also a wrestling coach. And he talked to me about wrestling, but I mentioned him because you were talking about your friend from Juneau. We were in college. We were dumb. We were doing the things that dumb kids do in college.
Yeah, of course.
One of the traditions when we would do the spring musical, because I was acting in college, one of the traditions of the spring musical every year, we did usually a children's play. The last production of the year was always a children's play. We would perform for the local schools in Dubuque, Iowa. Yeah. And then every once in a while, we would get the opportunity to go to a place in Mount Carroll, Illinois, where they did summer stock theater. It was a place called Timberlake Playhouse. And we would go there for a week, and we would get to entertain, I think.
Wow.
we did like 3 or 4 shows a day for a week. Anyway, that being said, there was a tradition when we did the spring production. We would go out to Julian Dubuque, the city's name, Dubuque, Iowa, was named after Julian Dubuque's grave. In order to get to, which we shouldn't have been doing, we shouldn't have been out there, and we were on grounds at night, which was wrong and blah, blah. And the police came out 1 or 2 times, I remember. But the reason I mention all of this is that you had to cross the Mississippi, a part of the Mississippi on train tracks.
Wow.
To get to this area. How dumb were we? And me, train tracks, the ties, the railroad ties.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what the dimension is, how far away they are, but it's a decent gap for a little person trying to make that step. So my friend, who his nickname was Rip, he's a wrestler, pretty built, stocky. I would get on his back, piggyback with him, and he would cross these railroad ties with me on his back just to go to this site that was a tradition every spring. I think about it now, and I'm just going to say it, Eric, how fucking nuts were we?
Yeah.
I mean, what in the hell were we thinking? But when you're in that age, like you said, your friend from Alaska, you don't think about things, but his dad's like, tethering him so he doesn't fall into the ice, because that would be a rough, ending. Yeah, it's just that kind of stuff. And I guess, there's something to be said about having that sense of fearlessness when you're younger, that you do try things as long as they aren't too ridiculous.
Yeah.
We've all tried ridiculous things.
Yeah.
But so I was thinking about that bridge over the Mississippi. That was nuts. What were we thinking?
You remind me of a story in high school with my friend Eric. We had a shooter, or potentially the alarm went off and the PA system went off, and they're like, shooter, there's a shooter on campus. Everybody, stay still or run. Our class was in the backfield where it leads into the street. So everyone in that classroom decided we're just going to run. We're just going to leave and run. And here I am trying to get Eric, and Eric is like, little legs. He's trying to run with us. And we're barely going to make the street. We were probably like 100 yards away. And I was like, come on, Eric. I wasn't going to leave him behind. I was like, let's go. And then here comes this big football player. His name was Matt. I remember, a big guy, stocky guy. He was one of our linebackers. He was running from behind us, grabs Eric, picks him up, and he's holding him like a football. And then we're all running down the street. And then he's like, nobody gets left behind, Eric, not even you. So I just imagine what you just said when you got on your friend's back. I just imagine that story.
I mean, but think about that, Eric. I never, what? There are pros and cons to coming from a small town, a lot of cons. And not that can't happen anywhere nowadays, because it does. But I will say, luckily, and I totally feel for those who've ever had that, you're sitting there talking about doing drills for that.
No, this was real. This was real.
That was real. That was real. I'm sorry.
That was real. Yeah.
That was real. We never had to address that, luckily, I think about the drills we had. We had the fire drill. We had the tornado drill. The tornado drills were a riot, because they were and not to underscore what you're talking about, because that's really serious. And I'm glad and fortunate, but I think about my kids, my girls are in school, and they do active shooter drills now, because everybody, and I would hope that for them. And I know that in my heart, I can have some, even in that horrible situation, I can have some relief knowing that my daughters have the same types of friends.
Yeah.
I don't care if you're embarrassed right now, grab them and go, please don't let them be left behind. Please don't let them left behind, because that would be the worst. Yeah. That would be the worst. But I was thinking about the tornado drills that we had in the Midwest, and we had to go under a desk or in the basement of this area, and we were supposed to put our knees between our heads between our knees. And I'm like, what is that going to do for you? They were like, well, if anything falls, to protect your head. Well, what if the whole damn floor falls?
The whole
I mean,
building.
what are you talking about? I mean, I always used to make the joke, and I think I got this from somebody else. Is that, well, we put our heads between our knees to kiss our asses goodbye because really, a tornado?
Yeah.
Under what's under our desk going to do? It's like the desk are going to stay there, and how ridiculous and obtuse that sounded. You're from, of course, California.
We have earthquake drills. You guys have tornado drills. We have earthquake drills.
We need to talk about the earthquake drill. They would tell you to go stand in a doorway, right?
Well, that has been, within the past 10 years, that's been debunked. They told everyone to stop doing that.
Okay, because I'm like, why?
Yeah.
Why? Whenever you saw something leveled by an earthquake, did you ever just see random damn doorways standing out there by themselves going, oh, thank God, Eric was under a doorway. He's okay.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. And the reason why they're saying this is the 1906 earthquake. When that happened,
the big one
here in San Francisco, every area that was demolished or that was torn down by the earthquake, the only thing left standing was the doorway of the front of a house or a building. So now they're thinking, stand under a doorway. So they gave that whole, for 100 years, they kept telling kids, stand under a doorway, stand under a doorway. But then you have kids like me and you, it's like, well, if the whole building falls down, what's the doorway going to do for us? Same thing. We had to hide under a desk during an earthquake drill also. And we had the same question. If the whole building falls, what's under the desk going to do?
At least they know where to find you, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, Eric and Aaron were pancaked under desk. I mean, well, it makes sense. They were told to sit there.
And then I finally had a teacher finally tell me, this is my adult life already. This is a teacher that she wasn't my teacher, finally told me it was the state's way of not causing panic to everyone and running all over. I'm like, but running into a football field is a lot safer than sitting under a desk, right?
Yeah, with an earthquake, absolutely. Yeah. Now, on the other end of that, let's play devil's advocate for like the tornado thing. With earthquakes, and again, I'm not an expert, okay? Here's a shift of plates in this planet. Here, things start moving, vibration, and whatever's above the surface, if shook hard enough, is going to collapse. Yeah. No matter how strong it is, okay? That's my general understanding of an earthquake. I've been in only two, and they were minor. I mean, they were just like, it was the first time as a Midwesterner being on the east side or the west side. We actually had a tornado an earthquake. We were feeling the aftershock from one that happened in Alabama years ago. Wow. And so when I felt it, I was just like, why is the couch tremoring? I mean, it was just very subtle. It wasn't anything major. I was just like, and it felt like, I thought I had a shiver. It's like, why is oh my God, why is the couch shaking? And they're like, oh, we had where's that coming from? And then the next morning they're like, oh, Georgians, don't worry. You're okay. There was a earthquake somewhere in Alabama down on the, the water, the coastal area. And from that, we felt that aftershock, that tremor all the way in, it was east of Atlanta. And I was like 20, at that time, I was like, where I was living was like 30 miles east of the center of Atlanta, and we felt it from Alabama. Long story short, tornadoes are still to this day. Did you ever see the movie Twister?
Yep. Favorite movie. Good movie.
We were, okay, as Midwesterners, we're laughing our butts off at that film, okay? And not because it was adventurous. Wasn't it Bill Paxton?
Bill Paxton,
Helen Hunt, right?
Yep.
Okay. And some of the things that were happening, I mean, granted, it's Hollywood, it's film magic and whatever, but some of those things you're like, oh my God, we were laughing so hard, as being used to tornadoes and like when the cow is in the air and they're and you're and we're like, oh, that is too good. Or the part where the house like flips around in front of them and they drive the truck through it or up through the staircase. We were dying. Okay. So the tornado thing is weird and creepy because it is so, like a hurricane, on wind, wind tunnel on water, wind tunnel on earth, some of the things that can happen, we were talking about hiding under the desk or being in the lower level. Of course, lower level, because there is a tendency for those winds to pass over lower levels. They will literally, like you said, for an earthquake, you're out in a football field would be your safest, because it's not, whatever's out there isn't going to fall on you. It's an open space. Where with a tornado, you wouldn't want to be out in a football field. That's they love those areas. They'll suck you right up. But I have to share the story. My farm, not my farm, but my parents' farm and their my father's grandparents' farm, used to be his grandparents' farm, in 1968 was hit by, most of it was leveled by a tornado.
Wow. And
one of the most intriguing, or a couple of the most intriguing and yet super alarming things, one was they found straw stuck into the side of fence posts like darts.
Wow.
Wooden fence posts, which are, that big around, and they're usually coated with something to preserve them.
Yeah.
Straw stuck into it like a dart, like a dartboard. It was like, wow. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, wow.
My father had found one of the cattle with a 2x4 through its neck. Ooh. Like it was born there, like it was part of it. That's the force of that wind. And cattle are, well, you guys have shoes. Everyone has shoes and whatever. Leather, you know what leather is? That's pretty durable.
Yeah.
It's pretty, imagine that. So that was intense. And then the other thing that was really unbelievable was that this house, the main house on that property, the roof had been pulled off. I think it was a 2-story home, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. And the roof had been pulled off. And in that day, the baseboards were like yay high in the old style homes. They were, more than 6 inches or whatever, but not quite a foot. Some of that had been ripped off in the kitchen from the force of the wind. Yet the newspaper was laying on the kitchen table.
Wow.
That's what's so crazy about tornadoes. That's what's so wild and mysterious about tornadoes. And so people talk about like storm chasing, and I had done a little bit of that. And what I mean by that is I was in the vehicle that my dad was driving. We were just kind of following, but not super close, because that storm can turn on you at any given minute. And so you're like, oh God, crazy. Like crazy.
No, it's funny. I spent 2 weeks or maybe even a month in North Little Rock, Arkansas. My cousins are, half Filipino. And when their dad passed away, I said, let me go hang out with them for the summer. Let me go, just be with them, be there for my aunt. And in the middle of that, I went through 2 tornadoes, 2 tornado warnings, one tornado that actually hit the area that we were in North Little Rock. And the way we treat earthquakes here was the way they were treating tornadoes out there. We get anything under a 4.0 to us, it's just like, oh, it's just a minor earthquake. So when we're having this tornado warning and they're like, okay, everybody must get to your, basement or somewhere. My aunt was like nonchalantly smoking a cigarette. She's like, all right, guys, we have to go. And then next thing you know, I was like, why are you guys doing this? Yeah. So then, the whole tornado situation, I was like nervous. I was petrified. I was like, come on, we got to go to the basement. Come on. And they were like, just imagine hillbilly kids, big kids who are taking their time walking down to the basement. And I'm sitting here like, let's go. And they're like, it's just a little tornado. We're just going. I'm like, a little tornado. Of course, I've never been in one. I'm freaking out. I'm hearing the sirens outside of their house. And I'm like, dude, this is serious. But no, they were like, no, we'll be fine. Don't worry about it. We'll be all right. But no, there's the same thing that, when people from not in California comes to California and they get the whole earthquake thing. The good thing about tornadoes is you guys know when it's coming. you guys know, like they
For the
give
most
you,
part.
yeah, they
For
give you,
yeah, for the most part, right.
Yeah. Us with earthquakes, we only find out when it happens,
Well, that and I'm not speaking out of turn. I'm not trying to speak out of turn, but with us, if you go to a basement, it's the reason that homes have basements, or one of the many reasons homes have basements in the Midwest. When I moved to the Southeast, there are homes here that don't have basements, which blew me away.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
why don't you have a basement? And they're like, well, I mean, structurally, we don't have to worry about it. Although we do have tornadoes here now. There's no joke about tornadoes in Georgia. But anyway, what I was going to say about what you were saying about the earthquake thing, and I'm speaking as a novice, as a, pretty much an apprentice to the concept. Where do you go? I mean, you can't go down.
Yeah.
You can't go, you fly, get on a plane quickly and fly off. I mean, where do you go?
Yeah.
Because again, if you're in an open area and it's shaking, okay, a little unsettling. But when you're amongst buildings and stuff, and that's where your danger is.
Yeah.
That's where you're like, oh, good God, what do we do?
I mean, the good thing for me is I'm not downtown San Francisco where they have the high-rise buildings, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. There's still tall buildings here, but we're talking about 4 stories is the tallest where I'm in the part of the city that I'm in. So, San Francisco is supposed to be the safest when it comes to earthquakes, but, we do still have buildings here that are 100 years old that I don't know if they'll be standing if a big earthquake ever hit. So, we'll find out when that happens. But it's just kind of scary.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah,
very much so. Yeah, and like you said, your friend Eric during that time, well, that was about the active shooter thing. But even at that, where you're talking about when you physically can't get away from it fast enough, whether it be earthquake, whether it be whatever, it is unsettling. It's very alarming. Not to reference the Wizard of Oz, not because of the Munchkin thing, but also because they're wanting to get in the cellar.
Yeah.
And my grandparents' the farmhouse had one of those. I mean, we don't have that. You don't see the storm cellar anymore, but it literally was dug into. It may not even be part of the home. It might have been just this concrete underground little storage area where they used for, storing stuff. But then also that was the getaway.
Yeah.
That's where you went if there was a tornado. So when you see in the movie, they're trying to open those doors and go underneath, they're literally going into a hole that's protected in the ground.
Yeah.
Because the tornado won't hit you there.
Yeah.
So
when you were growing up in your town, did you guys have a plan implemented just in case? Like, did they say, this is where we're going and this is what's going to happen? Did your dad have that implemented with you guys?
Well, I mean, we lived out where the farm is, where my parents' farm is probably about just shy of 2 miles from the city or the town, if you will. So on the farm, you were just getting to the basement.
Yeah.
You heard, and I'll tell you this, I have a story particular about my mother was involved with it. I'll tell you that in a second. So then we knew to go to the basement, and the basement for us, the lowest level of our home, it was like it had a pool table down there and a refrigerator and a sink. So if we went down there, we could just hang out down there, not that you're like having a party or anything, but you weren't like sitting in this tiny little box all shaking going, oh my God, the world's coming to an end. And if we were at school, that was to get to the lowest level as well. And in the grade school, there was an underground part. It was a basement as well. There were classrooms in the basement. Yeah. So we would go down to that. In the high school, there was nothing under the ground that I recall or that I know of. So we would go into inside wall.
Okay.
That's what you would do in a tornado. You go to the inside wall, stay low, because the attitude was the inside walls had the most protection and the greatest part of the structure. You wouldn't want to go to the gymnasium in a tornado because that's a big open cavernous space that when a tornado hits, that vacuum that can form would suck the roof off, whatever, suck everything that's in the gym right out of it. So you wanted to go to an inside wall. Oh, we would go in. See, you got me going. Now I'm walking back through the days of high school. You'd go to like a bathroom on the bottom floor, go inside there, because as many people as you could cram in there, get down, because that was had how many different walls and channels.
Yeah.
So that had more structure to it. I'm trying to think, but I brought up my mother because I remember when we were younger, like my sister and I'm 6 years older than my sister, and we were outside playing. I might have been 10. She was like 4. Okay. We're outside playing, and it's a little breeze, sunny day. And all of a sudden it became deathly still. And I mean like deathly quiet.
Yeah.
And not to sound dramatic or set up some wonderful horror film. My mom was a cosmetologist before she passed, and she had, in our farm home, her salon was in one part of the house.
Okay.
And so I remember that door opening. We're playing out. We were probably 70, 80 yards from, like on a football field, 70 or 80 yards from that door. And I remember her opening that door and screaming at the top of her lungs, "Get in here right now." And we're like, what the hell's up with Mom? I mean, and then there was like that, did we do something? Is something wrong? Did we make a mess or something and don't remember? I mean, are we going to get, in trouble? And she's like, "Come on," and she's yelling, "Come on." And we're like, what the? There was a tornado.
Wow.
She knew it. She said, I don't know, one of the salon clients was watching like outside, because I remember there was the door that had glass in it. And then there was one window in the salon that looked out the front of the home. And I think one of her clients was like, my mother's name was Audrey. She's like, "Audrey, there's something happening." All of a sudden it got really quiet, very quiet. And that was that old adage of the calm before the storm. Yeah. And then boom, just like that, tornado. And I remember running. We ran up to actually through that door. We could have gone in. There were 3 doors in the front of that home, one by the garages, one in the middle of the home that led into like the dining area or the living room, and then one where her mom's salon was, because there has to be an exterior door for her business.
Yeah.
And there was that. So we ran into that door, and there wasn't a couple turns and you could get to the basement from the salon. So we're all running downstairs. And I remember her clients went downstairs with us. We're all sitting down there waiting, to see what would happen. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a childhood memory forever imprinted and embossed on my brain God bless my sister. She, as a kid, would it was very traumatizing, those like storms and stuff. She got very spooked by that as a little girl. And I mean, granted, they are a little alarming, no doubt about it. I mean, here you're minding your own business, playing outside, and now we're all running and hiding under the pool table in the base. And we would do that too, now that I think about it. Oh my God, we'd hide under the pool table. We were hiding, as kids, we'd hide under the pool table. I don't know why, but I guess we thought that was a sound structure. Yeah. We'd hide under the pool table in the basement whenever a tornado hit, if we, could. Yeah. When you think about these things, just the day-to-day things, we were, before the show, I was talking to you about just that idea of impressions and how things, I mean, we all have things from our past that have left an impression, some wonderful, some not so great, but also we're talking about like impressions of when we meet people.
Yeah.
And I wanted to lead in, if you're cool with it, I wanted to lead into, as a little person, impressions that I've had of others, who have responded to me being a little person, and impressions they've had. And then also impressions of like family and friends who have been with me in public. One, we were talking about this before the show as well. People don't believe that certain things happen.
Yeah.
Not that they think you're lying or anything, but they're like, there's no way that people act like that. And you're like, yeah, they kind of do. And it isn't until they face it, just like whether it be, you've experienced things being a San Franciscan and you've been being Filipino descent. You've experienced things that honestly, Eric, I will never be able to relate to. I was born in the Midwest, raised in the Midwest on a farm. Certain people can't relate to that. Being a little person, obviously, many people don't necessarily relate to that. But until you've experienced it firsthand, either directly as the individual or a bystander who is connected to the individual, like you said, Eric, or, your friend from Juneau.
Yeah.
It kind of wakes you up at times. And I've had my significant other she is very sweet and so like delightful. And yet she can get really, really protective, which I love. And she has been in experiences with my kids, with the two girls who are little, the two younger girls who are little. And I remember I have to share this story, and it's kind of the mama bear story, if you will. She has been, because she's not little. My significant other is not little. She's not like a sky monster or anything. She's like 5'2", but damn it, Eric, to me, that's pretty tall. Yeah. And so we were at a mall and these little girls were staring at our little girls, little, when I say little girls, younger girls, were intrigued by our little girls. And it incensed T. I call her T. She was bothered by that because they were like locked in. Like deer in the headlights, wouldn't move. And so she did. I didn't expect this, but it was the perfect thing to do because it wasn't being rude. It wasn't, trying to be offensive or sarcastic, any of that. She just stepped in between their gaze and our two little ones. And they were still, it was crazy. It was like she cut the wall, like the flow of water. Yeah. She stopped. And they were still for that first little moment staring. And then she got in between their vision and our girls, and it hit them. And then they looked up, and she was, that look mothers have.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, Eric?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where they don't have to say anything. Yeah. I'm going to try. I'm not a mom. I obviously, but I admire mothers. I think they're like Navy SEALs. Yeah. Okay, but they have that look where they don't say a word.
Yeah. You're in trouble. Yeah.
And they do those eyes.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. It was awesome. And those little girls were like, their eyes were like, uh-oh. And they walked off. And then that, without saying a word, I mean, really no conversation.
Yeah.
Was shared. No, nothing said, just that presence. And they got it.
Good.
They understood it, and they moved off. And it's crazy to think that, although if you've never experienced it, T was also the one who introduced me to the phrase, which I still trying to diagram this sentence. I'm still trying to figure out. She always used to say, you don't know what you don't know until you didn't know it. You've heard something of that variation, I'm sure. You don't know what you don't know until you didn't know it. And it's that idea of, until you've been around somebody who has, whatever unique quality or trait, and you get to know them as a person and a human being, who knows how we feel about things? Who knows how we're going to respond, And so, yeah, in everyday life, when you go out in public, and I don't want to sound like I live under a bridge or anything, or, in this deep, dark cave.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes those experiences are put right in front of you where, oh, yeah, I'm different. I am different. And you forget about it.
Yeah.
Not that you want to forget about it, but you do. You just think, oh, I'm just like any other human being. And then you have one of those outside experiences, and yeah, it kind of puts it all back into perspective that we all, we're all different, but obviously some people are noticeably different
Yeah.
immediately upon first impression. And my mom was very protective. My sister was fairly protective. My dad was always like, I don't care what other people think.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
They stare. I'm not going to change my day or my life. Or if they say something ridiculous, forget them.
Yeah.
He said a different word that began with F, but I'm not going to say, like, forget them.
Yeah.
Why? Don't let them affect you like that.
Yeah.
That doesn't determine who you are. So I think that's an interesting life lesson. You and I were talking before the show about animals, like pets, dogs.
Yeah.
Dogs are, animals sense things. Remember watching? Did you ever watch Lassie?
Yeah.
And then remember we make the joke of what Timmy fell in the well.
Yeah,
the dog's barking and trying to get help or whatever. But dogs sense things, and I have T's oldest daughter has 2 dogs, and the one dog for the longest time was not comfortable around me. And no, I didn't do anything to the animal. I'm not kind of some type of weirdo. As soon as that dog saw me, start barking. And it's crazy because there's something about an animal's instinct that they see this little person and they might think, oh, there must be just like all the other little ones who are kids.
Yeah.
And if they hear that voice or they feel that presence, and that makes them uncomfortable and unsettled, and so they're like, and for the longest time, the dog's name is Penny. Penny did not care for me. If I walked into the house, into our oldest daughter's home, she was barking her head off and running around the table and then go hide in the corner. And because Aaron had just entered, so it was kind of weird. It was crazy for the longest time.
They're like, I see a kid, but I hear an adult, right? That's what.
Yes,
that's what.
I think if there was a way to trace a dog's, brain patterns. Yeah, they're probably going, now this little fella here, he should be a kid, right? But he sounds like one of those bigger people.
Yeah.
And what's that about? I'm going to bark at it. So yeah, it's that crazy sense. And we're talking about doing, day-to-day things that people don't think about. Yeah, that's one of them. I'm thinking about different situations just in life and when the average individual experiences that, for a little person, there's a lot more involved. We talked about altering clothes. We've talked about, relationships, but just day-to-day things. I was just thinking about this the other day. When you go to like an amusement park, and the first thing that, on the big rides, quote unquote, remember the movie Big?
Yeah.
And he couldn't get on that ride because he had to be this tall. And as an adult, there are numerous rides that I can't get on. I will say, I'm not going to name any names of any places because I don't want anybody to get nervous. I have finagled my way on certain rides because they're like, okay, I'm like, I'll take care of it. If I get killed in this, I'll take the blame, what have you. And because I wanted to ride, I wanted to get on the ride. And as an adult, I didn't want, and then there were a couple where I got on the ride and I was like, strapped in, but I was like floating and I was like, oh, I get it. I get now why, because of the dimensions.
Yeah.
They don't want you to fly from the damn thing and, be a spot on the ground.
Yeah.
I understood, as a kid, you're like, oh, this isn't fair. But as an adult, you're like hanging on for dear life. Like, oh, I get it now. I get why, I probably shouldn't be riding this.
Never getting on that again. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a big park in Atlanta, and there was a roller coaster where, nowadays the thing is, like the free falling different rides, but it was a roller coaster. I wasn't in like one of those free falling things, and I'm floating in the roller coaster. Like it's got the chassis over me and I'm holding on because my rear is off the seat and my legs don't have anything to catch, or hang on to or put anywhere. And I'm sitting there hanging on to this thing going, God, I hope I make out of this alive. This was a dumb idea, And so, yeah, there's just stuff like that where, you don't think about that until you have to.
Yeah,
You
of
know,
course.
I mentioned to you, we were talking about, the news thing, people passing in the last week or two. And it brought to mind a good friend of mine by the name of Kevin Nash.
Yeah.
And we have talked about Kevin. I think I've talked about him in the past. He's a wrestler, former wrestler. He's done a lot of film now and television. He's 6'10". So when I'm thinking about the things I can't do because I'm 4 feet and 3 inches tall, and then he's 6'10", and there's how many things that he's limited to.
Yeah.
What polar opposites, but still the same appreciation for not being the quote unquote, I don't want to say normal, because I think the word normal is ridiculous, but the quote unquote, average, the average male and the average female, he's above the average male. I'm, obviously below the average male, but yeah, just the demands that, and the things that you don't imagine when you do have a physical difference,
Yeah.
So, yeah, he talks about clothing he can't find or cars he can't fit into. It's like, oh, wow, I've never thought of that. I mean, I know the clothing I can't, that's too big and I've got to alter, but I've never had a problem with a car for the most part. I mean, renting a car can be unique because, and people don't think about this, and I didn't think about it obviously either. I've had a couple moments where I couldn't rent a certain vehicle because the pedal extensions I have didn't fit. They didn't work on certain cars.
Okay.
And so I've had times where I've been in a rental car place and they were very cool about it. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't use this vehicle because my pedals don't work on it. And they've actually given me an upgrade, which was really cool. At no extra, it's like, oh, here's one of those pros of being a little fella. But yeah, life is about making adjustments.
Yeah. My coworker asked, and I'm glad you brought this up. When you talked about your pedals for cars, do you bring that everywhere you go? If you know you're going to be driving, like if you're shooting out of town, do you bring the pedals with you?
If I'm shooting out of town and I have a rental vehicle, yeah. Or if I don't have a driver, yeah, I do. And what I have person is still in existence. I think these came from a man who were from Vermont. It's either Vermont or Connecticut. And I apologize. I think it was Vermont. And he was like a engineer.
Yeah.
And he had created these pedals that, as a little person, the one thing I didn't want, some little people use and teach their own, I wanted my feet to not hang off the edge of the seat.
Yeah.
For some little people, their feet are hanging off the edge of the seat. I wanted to be able to touch the floorboard.
Yeah. And
so I have cushions that I put behind. Now I don't take the cushions with me all the time. I'll either use my backpack, like if I travel, I'll put my backpack behind me so it gives me the support. But I have a little wooden base to my pedals that the gas pedal attaches to at the bottom, almost like a go-kart.
Yeah.
And then the brake is free floating like everybody else's brake. But yeah, and they all fit inside of each other. That's the great thing. So then I can take the brake off. I can take the gas pedal off of the car, my own vehicle. I have the tools that are compact and light, very light. Also, you want them lightweight. You don't want to be carrying tons and tons of pounds around. And so, and it all fits inside that box that becomes the floorboard.
Oh, nice.
And so, yeah, I can put that all of that will fit in my backpack.
Okay.
And so when I travel, I usually take my pack with me. I put them in my suitcase at times. The problem with that is then you got to fish them out of there when you're at the rental place.
Yeah.
And open your suitcase up and you got your drawers flying everywhere because you're trying to get stuff out of your suitcase. Yeah. So they're fairly mobile. I say all that only to say they're fairly mobile. Yeah. So whenever I've had to rent a vehicle in another city or drive someone else's vehicle, I've taken my pedals at times with me. And it, people don't think about this. Whenever I visit my family, more often than not, even though they're in Iowa and I'm in Georgia, I drive there.
Okay.
Because it's nice to have your own vehicle and it's nice to not have to rely on others. It's also nice to not be, going, hey, can you give me a ride here? And can you give me a ride here? And I'm sorry, but can you give me a ride here? Because I can't just jump in someone's vehicle and drive it off. I can, but people are going to get hurt because I don't have my pedals and it's going to be treacherous. I'm making a really lame joke, but I mean, I have to have my pedals with me or I can't operate the vehicle. So yeah, to answer your friend's question, if I did, yeah, I take my pedals whenever I need to. Absolutely.
Has TSA ever asked what are these, or did they ever like, hey?
Yeah, they have. Well, if they're in my backpack and they go through the scanner, they've opened the bag up and they're like, and I'm like, those are my, because it does look like some type. You're right. I didn't even think of that. It does look like some type of apparatus. You're like, what the hell do you have in this bag? And I just said, these are my pedals for the cars. I've never had. I'm glad you brought that up. I've never had any type of issue going through security or customs in an airport. Well, the only issue you have, or I've had, I'm sorry, I shouldn't speak on behalf of anyone else. The only issue I've had is in the one machine where you do this number and the thing spins around you and scans you.
Yeah.
That never works for me. It always is beeping. And then I got to go over there and they're doing that thing with this thing and checking you out and whatever the wand. I've never passed that thing. I usually just go through the little doorway one. And I've told them, I'm telling you right now, I'm going to go through this glass one, the elevator, the spinning elevator one around you, and I'm going to fail this. Okay. It's going to beep. I'm like, oh, just go in. I'm like, yeah, okay. And then we end up getting the wand thing anyway. Yeah. So, yeah, no, I've never had. Oh, that's funny. I could bring this up. I've never had, as a little person, I've never had any run-ins in TSA. When we were adopting our oldest from Russia.
Yeah.
I have to share this story only because I'm a farm kid and it was just me being dumb Aaron. When we were in Russia, we had brought back some things as gifts that would make it through custom thinking. The one thing that I should not have brought was the family that we were staying with, our host family, had given me this really awesome, I had raved about this particular meat they had. I thought it was just absolutely delicious. And I wasn't thinking, Eric, you can't bring that kind of stuff into the U.S., because of airborne and bloodborne pathogen and whatever bacteria could be on that meat. What an idiot. I'm sorry. I should have known better. I'm going to admit this because I'm not a proud individual. And the meat was really good. They were going to make me throw it out at customs. So I sat there and ate it as much as I could. I was like, this is really good. And so they're like, you got to throw that away. I'm like, no, we're not doing that. And they're like, what? I'm like, I'm not throwing that away. And they're like, what do you mean? And you can't go through. I'm like, I'm going to eat as much as I can. And they were looking at me. I've got something on the camera there. They were looking at me like, I remember there were 2 or 3 of them standing there and they're like looking at me like I was absolutely off my rocker. And I'm like, I am not throwing this away. And so I ate it. I sat there like, well, you can't go through. I'm like, okay, fine. I'll eat as much as I can. And it was sausage. It was really good, Eric. It was being raised on a farm and having such an appreciation.
Yeah.
It was delectable. It was so good.
I think I would have been more disappointed if you threw it away. I'm glad you sat there and ate it. So,
well, I crammed as much as I could. I ate as much as I could, which I will say. Then I was like bloated for the next 4 hours. I was just like, I'm not throwing this away, but it was worth it. When you eat a really good meal and then you feel horrible afterwards, but you're like, it was worth it. It was worth it. All right. I ate way too much barbecue, but I'm not resenting the fact that I feel like a stuffed cow right now. It was worth it. So I had one of those moments.
But you also had that. You also had that flight back from Russia to here, right? So
yes, we were leaving Moscow and we flew at that time we flew from Moscow to, there was a connector. I think we would either land in Frankfurt, Germany, or we landed in Amsterdam. And then Amsterdam, at that time, they didn't have a direct flight for some reason from Moscow to Atlanta, or Frankfurt or Amsterdam to Atlanta.
Yeah.
To New York. And so that flight was long from Amsterdam or Frankfurt, whatever it was, to New York, because I was like, oh, I think I'm going to throw up. I probably shouldn't have eaten all that. That was ridiculous, but yet it was worth it. You know when you have that guilty, I'm not going to be ashamed by this.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say I did it. I'm proud of it. I knew what I was doing. Yes, in the back of your head, you're going, oh, what a dumbass. Why did I do that? But I'm not going to admit that to anybody else, that I shouldn't have wolfed that down, but it was really good.
Every person there, especially us men, would have been more upset that you threw it away.
See?
Yeah. Because
exactly,
you would take that flight home and you would have been telling yourself, damn it, I should have just ate it.
Yes.
Instead of throwing it away.
Exactly. Exactly right.
I would have done the same thing.
I'm not ashamed by this.
No,
I'm
going to
do this.
You shouldn't be.
And you know what? And I say this with all due respect to the women in our lives. The women are like, oh, you're such a moron. You're like, nope. No, it's my animal instinct.
Nope.
I'm not giving this up. It's worth it. I don't care if I feel horrible for 3 hours.
Yep.
I did.
Yep. And just imagine what that family who gifted you this meat would have thought if you threw it away.
Exactly. And that was in the back of my head, Eric, honestly, because raised on a farm, when somebody gives you, especially if it's something that's perishable, like food.
Yeah.
We never, and I know my significant other, T, she's like, she gets on me sometimes. She's like, you are so maniacal about never scrapping anything. She's like, to the point of like, I think hear me out.
Yeah.
And we'll probably have to wrap on this because I see the time here. Hear me out. Being raised on a farm, you were taught very young, we don't waste food.
Yeah.
And so you think, and people go, oh my God, but expiration dates are on food for a reason, but there's some leeway with expiration dates, depending on what the food is.
Yeah.
Okay. You probably shouldn't, if the milk is expired, I wouldn't drink it 2 weeks after the expiration date unless you like cheese.
Yeah.
Okay. It's probably curdled.
And a stomachache. Yeah.
Exactly. But certain things are like, that's BS. They're putting that on there so they don't get sued.
Yeah.
So, because if somebody has an upset stomach, they're going to throw up, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So, thank you. Thank you, Eric, for reinforcing that what I did in that customs, and I believe it was Frankfurt, Germany, what I did was right.
And again, I'm going to say it again. I think you and all us men would have done the same thing. We would have sat there and would have took us less than a minute to think about what we wanted to do. And if my flight didn't leave for another 4 hours and I had, 10, 15 minutes to finish this, I'm finishing it. So
that's exactly the boat we were in.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite 4 hours, but it was like a couple. And I knew I could sit there. I'm like, I'm going to eat this. And I did. I took about 15 minutes sitting there. I'm like, I'm eating this. I would
have been upset if you threw it away. I would have been like, Aaron, what's wrong with you?
It was so good.
Now you make me want to go to one of the delis out here and see what they have.
Yes. See, now I've got you salivating.
Yeah.
It's the idea of, the indigestion later, it was worth it.
Yeah,
it was worth it. Yeah. You go to those restaurants where you're like, God, I shouldn't eat this, but I'm going to eat this because it tastes so good right now.
Yeah.
And then 4 hours later, you're like, all of the discomfort, it was worth it.
It was worth it. It's always, anytime I go to a buffet, anytime I go to an all you can eat, we have this thing here in San Francisco. It's a hot pot, and I won't go to a hot pot unless it's an all you can eat hot pot. And I stuff myself to where, like you said, 3 hours after I'm eating, I'm like, oh God, I never should have ate that, but it was worth it.
It was worth it.
Yeah.
Worth it. That's what life is. It was worth it.
Yeah, it was. Another great show that we have here.
What a crazy hour.
I love it. I love the topics that we're talking about. It's like, it's just not one thing, but it's everywhere else. We
went from tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes to consuming way too much meat in a customs in Europe.
But see, this is the Diary of the Little Man's podcast. This is exactly what we're talking. We're talking about the ins and out of the things that we do, and and I love it. I love it. I love it. We'll be back again next week. Sorry for the delay.
We got to figure out. We got to go in a different direction. Let's do something wild and crazy next week. I'll talk to you after the show.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about something next week. But this has been great. Definitely follow us on the Diary of the Little Man's podcast on YouTube, the Diary of the Little Man's podcast on Instagram, and the Diary of the Little Man's podcast at gmail.com. Give us suggestions that you guys want to talk about. Please. Let us know if you have questions. Aaron is pretty free on answering any questions as long as it's not, X-rated questions.
Well, I mean, to the point of, not ridiculous, but people have asked me everything and anything. We were actually talking about that on Friday. I was on set of a series that they're shooting here in Atlanta at Man Robinson Studios, actually. And I just said, people ask everything and anything.
Yeah.
I'm pretty open book and pretty lighthearted. And I've had fun sometimes saying, my response could be a little sarcastic at times, but, anything is open, literally.
Yes.
Anything.
Yes.
All right.
No, I'm glad. But definitely join us next week, and we'll be back next week. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening.
Bye, all.
This is the Diary of the Little Man's podcast. See you guys.
Adios.
You've been listening to the Diary of the Little Man's podcast.